Item 5.01, Superintendent's recommendation on Phase 1 Redistricting North. Dr. Bedell.
All right, thank you, Madam President. The superintendent's recommendation on Phase 1 redistricting, you all have a copy of it, and we're going to have staff that will take us through this process. But I have a couple of items that I need to mention to this school board, the members of this community who are here, around the enormous amount of work that has taken place to get us to where we are. So I faced early on in my tenure, a very difficult decision that we had to make around redistricting. And what I have said to this community is we wanted to do everything to operate with transparency. You will hear that in our remarks. But also, what you may not hear in my remarks is that people have to redistrict for two reasons. Generally, it's either you are experiencing an enrollment decline that results in you having to consolidate and close schools, which is not a healthy thing for communities because that ultimately results in property that now has to be managed and generally contributes to blight communities. But then you still have to create this level of discomfort to move people around. So it's not a good situation any way you look at it. Or you're in a situation where you have to redistrict because there's a lot of interest in your school system. People are moving in, and you have to balance schools to address overcrowding, which is where we find ourselves here in Anne Arundel County, which is a good problem, but it's still a bad situation because people move into certain neighborhoods to go to certain schools, and that then creates a level of discomfort. We also talked about the fact that this needed to be done in two phases just because of the significant amount of stress that trying to do whole district redistricting would put on the school system, whether it's transportation, whether it's shuffling of educators, or the amount of students that have to move at one time. We also know that with that comes constraints. One of the constraints that it inserts, or one of the realities, is that some families are will have to be touched twice. And we recognize that that will be the case. But in all sincerity, what you're going to hear about today is that we really did do our due diligence. We really inserted significant transparency in this process. Nobody can say they didn't know about it because otherwise you just didn't want to know about it. We put it out there. So let me go on ahead and read my statement, and then we'll pass it over to Matt and Kyle to take us through the presentation. This has been an enormous amount of work on the part of a lot of people, and I am grateful for their efforts to get us to this point. I want to thank Mr. Stansky, Mr. Roof, and the entire team for looking over every piece of input we received and working tirelessly with our consultant to try to see if it was something we could incorporate into this recommendation. As you will see, there have been some significant changes from the two potential scenarios presented by our consultant. We have promised that this will be a transparent process, and today is just the next step in that process. Later today, my recommendation and a number of resources related to it will be posted online at www.aacps.org/redistricting. We will open another portal for public comment so this board can have more input as it decides what proposal or proposals to take to public hearing. These are difficult decisions. There are a few things in education more emotional for families than changing the schools their students attend. I understand that. But I also understand the crucial need to optimize the use of our school buildings. Also, given the fact that Anne Arundel County is projected to be the fastest growing school district in the state over the next 10 years. We have to do this. It is important to note that every point in our internal deliberations to date, we have put the interests of children first in every decision we have made. I will reiterate that. Children first, and you will hear that. I am proud of the work that has been done to get us to this point, and I look forward to the process that remains as we come up with a final plan in November to address the first phase of this redistricting process. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Stansky and Mr. Roof to present the recommendation.
Thank you, Dr. Bedell, Dr. Tobin, members of the board. For the record, Matt Stansky, Chief Financial Officer.
Kyle Roof, Director of Facilities.
All right, we're going to walk you through the superintendent's recommendation this afternoon. What we're going to do is we're going to start with just an overview of the process to date. Then we'll walk you through the scenarios that the consultant had put together that we put online starting in February, scenarios 1 and 2. We'll give you an overview of our community engagement, get you some data and some statistics around that engagement. Then we will walk you through the superintendent's recommendation, and we'll go through next steps. All right, we're going to take about 10 seconds. You'll hear a lot of acronyms in this presentation, so for the board and the public, just wanted to have give you the ability to review some of the main acronyms that you may or may not hear, and so we'll take about 5 to 10 seconds to just look that over. All right, let's talk about the overview. So what are the guiding documents and principles that we're using? There's really, two main areas, which is board policy JAA and the regulation that accompanied that, along with the education article section 4-109. And really what we're looking for here is, it says up on the screen, to establish an equitable process for the determination of the geographic school attendance areas in Anne Arundel County Public Schools. So Dr. Bedell talked a little bit about why we're doing this, but why are we doing this? Obviously, we mentioned we're projected to be the fastest growing district in the state over the next decade. And we also currently, at the moment, have 16,000 available seats. That means we do not have enough enrollment for the number of available seats that we have, so we need to right size. Obviously, with the blueprint coming, we have two big changes, and our use of facilities will be altered as well. Main areas really surrounding pre-K enhancements and expansion, as well as the blueprint calls for additional teachers due to planning time, and we're going to need spaces for those teachers. So it's really critical that we balance our enrollments and maximize the available space that we have. What's really started all this was coming online in the 24-25 school year will be two new schools, West County Elementary School along with Old Mill West High School. Another reason to do this really is to maximize our CIP dollars. The state, the first question they ask when you're asking for a new project or a renovation dollars is, are you utilizing your existing facilities to the best of your ability? And so going through this process will give us the opportunity to say yes to that question when we meet with state officials. And really over the last decade, specifically around the Old Mill Master Plan, we've done a lot of construction, and so this is a good timing as where we are in that process to, again, realign students with buildings to maximize those construction dollars that we've been getting. Out of the 126 schools in the district, we studied 58. Again, two new schools, West County Elementary and Old Mill West High School. And out of our approximately 84,000 pupils, we looked at 41,586, and that is given the current school year. So let's talk about the process we've gone through to date. The administration back in September of 21 issued and advertised an RFP for a consultant to help with redistricting. That this board approved that consultant in November of 2021. In January of 22, policy JAA was revised by this board and approved, which then became the guiding document for our process moving forward. An initial presentation on a redistricting timeline and process was presented in September of 2022, and then a revised process and presentation was given in January of 2023. In February of 2023, the web tool with the two proposed scenarios from the WXY consultants was released. We gathered feedback for the next 3 months, and then staff gave a series of recommendations to the superintendent and the leadership team. We also, this board, at the last board meeting, approved the 2023 Education Facilities Master Plan, which was the latest available data we then used to put our recommendation together. And today you're now hearing our recommendation. And then moving forward will be a workshop later in July. In the August meeting, the board will select options to take to public hearing. Those public hearings and briefings will be held in September and October, and we have a target approval date of November 2023 for implementation in the 2024-2025 school year. With that, we're now going to walk you through scenarios 1 and 2, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Mr. Roof, and he will walk you through that.
So the primary mission of the study was to define the attendance area for the new Old Mill West High School and West County Elementary School. The study focuses on the county's northern high school clusters, including Chesapeake, Glen Burnie, Meade, North County, Northeast, and Old Mill High Schools. WXY produced boundary scenarios using both its redistricting model based on Markov chain Monte Carlo simulation software and manual edits. All boundary changes developed by the consultant in the boundary scenarios were individually reviewed by WXY and AACPS. The boundary scenarios included a set of shared assumptions. We wanted to improve utilizations as much as possible so that they fell within the 70 to 100% target utilization range. We wanted to reduce the number of schools that exceeded 100% and get as few schools as possible under the 60% utilization threshold. That's the boundary for state funding. We wanted to remove island assignments. This essentially means rezoning to make an individual school's attendance zone so that it is contiguous and it removes other portions that may be embedded in other boundaries. We wanted to preserve feeder patterns as much as possible, minimize distance traveled as much as possible, while also maximizing the number of pupils in the walk zone. We wanted to account for new development within those attendance areas, preserve the current grade bands. Examples of that would be to maintain the pre-K through 5 at elementary schools, middle schools 6 through 8, and high schools 9 through 12. We wanted to account for out-of-area enrollments. This includes magnet students and other pupils of choice, and holding those enrollments constant at those schools. And we also wanted to use the data from the 22-23 pupil data to determine estimated pupil counts. So each scenario takes a different approach to optimizing boundaries for the new facilities and other key metrics. The current slide shows key metrics relative to the existing school boundaries. Both scenarios significantly reduce the number of overutilized schools. If no boundary changes are implemented, the district is estimated to have 13 overutilized schools. Under scenarios 1 and 2, that number is reduced to 0. Both scenarios significantly reduce distances to school for elementary school kids. In scenario 1, the reduction of daily miles traveled for elementary schools is over 1,900 miles. Scenario 1 achieves the largest improvement in distances to school overall. Conversely, middle and high school students increase their distances under both scenarios. Scenario 2 rezones slightly fewer pupils. Scenario 2 rezones 19% of pupils in the non-terminal grades, which is about 6,700 students total. In both scenarios, the most impact to student assignments is at the middle school level. At the high school level, most student reassignments are contributed to the Old Mill West High School. Articulation patterns for scenario 1 are shown up on the screen. Gray lines indicate no change to the feeder patterns, while blue lines indicate a change to the feeder pattern, and tan indicate a split articulation. In scenario 1, 2 split articulations are introduced. George Cromwell elementary students are zoned to both Corcoran Middle School and Marley Middle School. MacArthur Middle School students living in the Frank Hebron Harmon Elementary School zone are rezoned to Old Mill West High School rather than Meade High School. When we look at scenario 1 utilizations, we see a reduction in overcrowded schools and a more balanced utilization within the study area. Please note the bottom of the screen where we list the estimated utilizations if no boundary changes are implemented. 13 schools are projected to be over capacity. In scenario 2, 1 split articulation is introduced, affecting 2 feeder patterns. MacArthur Middle School students living in the Frank Hebron Harmon Elementary School and Van Bachlen Elementary School zones are rezoned to Old Mill West High School rather than to Meade High School. Scenario 2 offers similar improvements to overcrowding and a balanced enrollment within that study area. Our transportation division compared both scenarios. They compared the number of existing walkers from scenario 1 and 2 and found that there was no significant difference between those two scenarios. When they compared the estimated walkers from the scenarios to our current numbers, there are about 200 more bus riders under both scenarios. Next, the division compared both scenarios to our current bus routes. Both scenarios increased the need for bus transportation within that study area, and it is estimated that 4 additional units would be required to transport those students under both scenarios. So engagement was an important process in this endeavor. The web tool was introduced in February 2023. The initial comment period extended until early June. During that time, we received 33,000 unique website users, 86,000 website page views, 15,000 unique address searches, 2,200 survey responses, and approximately 500 map comment reviews. You can see that during that initial launch period, we received the most activity, and then periodically throughout that period, we had press releases where the engagement increased. So the graphic shown up on the screen shows the location of 15,000 address searches. The top 5 attendance areas searched included Old Mill, Glen Burnie, Northeast, Severna Park, which was not part of this study, and then Chesapeake. Over 2,000 survey results were collected and reviewed. Chesapeake recorded 807 results, followed by Old Mill and Glen Burnie. In reviewing the survey results, 25% cited distance to school as their top priority. Feeder pattern and overutilization were tied for second. Similar priority rankings were noted in the individual clusters shown on the right side of the screen. Close to 500 map comments were reviewed. Users of the web tool were provided the opportunity to add up to 6 comments. And they added scores to each scenario and map location. These scores ranged from most negative to most positive. Boundary comments tended to be highly clustered in space and sentiment. As such, boundary comments provide an indication of which boundary decision that are most popular or unpopular. Neither scenario received a net positive approval rating. But overall, scenario 2 retained a more favorable rating throughout the entire engagement period. So after reviewing the comments and information gained through the public engagement period and updating the data set with information from the 2023 Educational Facilities Master Plan, the superintendent, with the assistance of the executive team and our planning staff, created the following recommendation. So the screen shows key metrics for the 2 scenarios presented in the web tool, as well as the superintendent's recommendation noted as S. The largest difference come from the distance traveled and assignment stability. The superintendent's recommendation lowers overall distance traveled and reduces the number of rezoned students relative to scenarios 1 and 2. At the same time, the plan provides similar overall utilization rates. no school in this plan is projected to be over capacity. A summary of utilization rates for the superintendent's recommendation are shown on the screen. As previously noted, all schools within the study area are projected to not exceed capacity. So scenario 2 boundaries were utilized as the starting point for the superintendent's recommendation. At the elementary school level, a notable boundary adjustment that differs from scenario 2 is in the Meade cluster, circled up on the screen. Many of the students in the area circled live within the Fort Meade boundary and community. This group indicated a strong desire to stay at an on-base elementary school. In response to this feedback, scenario 2 boundaries for Seven Oaks, Manorview, and Pershing Hill were adjusted. The heat map shows utilization categories. The utilization at Seven Oaks is being reduced from 89% in scenario 2 to 74% in the superintendent's recommendation, while Manorview and Pershing Hill utilization numbers are in the mid-80s. For middle school boundary adjustments, the notable difference between scenario 2 and the superintendent's is an articulation pattern at Freetown Elementary School. In response to feedback, a review of distance traveled to school, and an evaluation of transportation studies related to the Mountain Road corridor, the superintendent's recommendation keeps Freetown at Marley Middle School and within the Glen Burnie High School cluster through high school. This change reduces the utilization of Chesapeake Bay Middle School to 59% and raises Marley Middle School's utilization to 86%. The reduced utilization at Chesapeake Bay Middle School presents an opportunity to review future use of the space for administrative workspace or storage. At the high school level, the superintendent's recommendation makes additional adjustments to the articulation patterns. Following middle school at Corcoran, students who live within the Oakwood and Woodside Elementary School boundaries will attend Old Mill High School. Students who live within Freetown Elementary School will continue to attend Glen Burnie High School. These adjustments proposed by the superintendent lower the utilization at Chesapeake High School and increase Glen Burnie High School and Old Mill High School, but they keep them with well utilized or optimally utilized. Overall, the superintendent's recommendation includes 2 split articulations to help balance the secondary school enrollments. In the superintendent's recommendation, 2 split articulations are introduced. At MacArthur Middle School, students living in the Frank Hebron Harmon Elementary and Van Bachlen Elementary School zone are rezoned to Old Mill West High School rather than Meade High School. And Corcoran Middle School students living in the Oakwood and Woodside Elementary School zone are rezoned to Old Mill High School rather than Glen Burnie High School. Once again, our transportation division compared the superintendent's recommendation to scenarios 1 and 2, and there was no significant difference between the scenarios. They compared the estimated walkers from the superintendent's recommendation to our current numbers, and again, there were about 200 more bus riders under the new scenarios. This is primarily due to the articulation pattern adjustments made at North County and Glen Burnie. So next, the Transportation Division compared the superintendent's recommendation to our current bus routes. Under the recommendation, there is an increased need for bus transportation within the study area, and it's estimated that 4 additional units would be required to transport students. This is the same number under scenarios 1 and 2.
All right. So we did have a long discussion about legacy students, and the superintendent is recommending implementing that where students, where they enter the 12th grade, will have the option to remain at their existing high school that they are currently assigned. So these are for students who would be rezoned to a new high school. They're entering the 12th grade. We will give them the opportunity to stay at their existing high school. Two big caveats here. First is they would need to register in our what we're calling legacy student transfer portal so that we know where their option is. But I think more importantly that they would not be provided transportation. They would have to be able to transport themselves to and from school. And this is just, again, due to our lack of infrastructure around our capacity to essentially do double runs into all of these communities, since it's such a large redistricting that we're entering into. So that is going to be a recommendation in this proposal. And then for magnet students, just to reiterate that magnet students already assigned via lottery into those schools will be able to stay in their magnet school even if their home high school or middle school they were rezoned to a different school. So we will continue to honor those commitments for magnet students. Next steps, we've talked a little bit about this, but to reiterate, we will be reopening the comment period right after this presentation today. And then we'll have a workshop on the 26th where we'll do a deeper dive for the board and the community, and obviously a lot of Q&A on that during that meeting. And then ultimately on the 23rd of August, the board will have to vote to select which option or options to take to public hearing. Those hearings and briefings will happen in September and October with a target vote date of November 15th, 2023. And obviously we want to, this would take effect in the 24-25 school year. And with that, Madam President, turn it back over to you, and we are happy to answer any questions you or the board may have.
Thank you. Thank you for that extensive presentation. I'm just going to go in roll call order around the dais and see who has questions. I believe we're starting with Ms. Schalheim today. Ms. Schalheim.
First, I want to thank you, your teams, Dr. Bedell, for the immense amount of work that has gone into this process so far, from fielding the tens of thousands of questions and comments and feedback to preparing what I think is, at least at first blush, and it's going to take us all a lot of time to digest all the intricacies of this, but at first blush seems to be a very well considered plan. So I thank all of you. I do have a couple really quick questions. So firstly, did any of the possible redistricting decisions coming down the road in phase 2 influence decisions made in phase 1?
Nope. We were phase 1 focused the whole time.
Okay. And I understand the move not to put additional cars and burden on the Mountain Road corridor, and I'm definitely in support of that. But it does, actually, I think I have 3 really quick questions. So this is the second, and then I'll get to the third. So if that being the case, it brings the utilization number in that middle school to under that 60% threshold. What are the plans to make sure the state doesn't then prohibit future capital projects?
As Mr. Roof alluded to, we'll look at potential administrative use of that space or storage, which, that would then alter the state rated capacity of that building to get it above the 60%. But no firm plans in place as of yet, but that's obviously would be the next step if the board were to vote positive on the superintendent's recommendation.
Which is a great way to address that issue, if those schools being at the end of a peninsula. Then the third and last question I have is, and I won't need a second round for me. If Mountain Road spontaneously gets fixed, whatever that were to mean, what would then that mean for folks whose boundaries might then be changed? I'm specifically speaking about Severna Park.
Well, at a minimum, they'd have a better, safer road to drive on.
This is
And
true.
that's really, again, we were very focused on phase one. And so I don't think it would be proper for me to speculate on any potential future what ifs until we get to that point.
All right, fantastic. This is lovely, and thank you for all the hard work that's gone into it. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Dent?
So as always, great presentation. I echo Ms. Schallheim's comments, but I have some questions. The first one deals with the scenario one for the elementary schools, particularly the transportation issue. When we say we need 4 additional buses, have we mapped out? Well, let me just ask a different question. Is the area that you're going to need the buses in George Cromwell to get to Gamblenny and Hepburn Harmon to get to Old Mill? Is that where we're going to be? Is that the shortfall for the buses? Because it says at the end that you'll need 4 additional buses.
So I'll pull up the slide with transportation review. So our transportation department looked at each feeder pattern, including the Old Mill West cluster under both scenarios 1 and 2. On the bottom right of the screen, you can see on a high-level review, they indicated that 4 more buses would be needed at Chesapeake, students being rezoned in Glen Burnie, Meade, and North County would reduce the number required there, while at Old Mill High School, the majority of those buses are essentially flipping, right, to Old Mill West. So when you add up all those numbers, overall, it's a additional 4 buses.
Okay. What had stuck out to me was the Old Mill West 47 more. That's all. I just wanted clarity.
Yeah, 47 more is just a new cluster. So there's no Old Mill West cluster right now, so we have to put buses into that cluster.
Okay, so my question though is 4 additional buses is only needed for Chesapeake.
And this is in scenario one. This is what we're not recommending scenario one. So this is based on what the consultant put together for scenario one. But
Got
yes, that was related to the in that scenario, Freetown moving to Chesapeake Bay Middle and Chesapeake High
That's what it
School.
is.
That's where those buses would be needed in that cluster.
I'm asking this question because I don't want the new transportation problem. That's
Oh.
why.
Yep.
So that's why I'm asking. And then the last one is that on the very last slide, second to the last slide, I talked about the high school students. So I am very sensitive to high school. My children moved around more times than my daughter did, 3 different high schools. So I understand when students have the option or saying they want the option. When they're ultimately we're saying we got to move this around, and then our seniors get the opportunity to choose, right, on whether
Correct.
they want to stay. But we can't provide them the transportation. Dr. Bedell, I would ask that we just look at that scenario just a little bit more closely, because high school plus senior year is a lot. It's a lot of stress. Most of the children will probably, or students will probably have transportation, but then there's the ones that don't. And those are the ones that I worry about. I was an overbearing parent, so my children didn't get cars and didn't get the chance to drive. Go figure, right? But I am concerned about the 12th grade, students entering the 12th grade. I know most of them, if not all, will want to remain at their current high school. And so that poses a second set of cars on the road during, the school hours and that kind of stuff. So I just want to think through that a little bit more. And that's it. That's
Yeah.
it for me.
So let me respond to that. I think it's important for the public to hear a little bit of our reasoning behind this. We have not engaged in redistricting to the magnitude of what we're doing right now. So when we did Crofton, we were able to provide transportation because we're talking about one cluster. not multiple clusters being involved. And so under regular circumstances, probably a double route could potentially be doable, but it's, even if we were fully staffed, it's just not feasible given the scope of what we're doing right now with the number of students that are being touched. So I mean, I'm open to having conversation, but we did consider that, Ms. Dent, and we just said 41,000 kids potentially impacted, a number of, new schools coming online really made that something that I just don't see how we can get around it, but we will definitely be open to any thoughts and ideas.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lynn?
I think this is a good presentation. Thank you for all the information. I don't have any questions at this time.
Thank you. Mr. Silkworth?
Thank you, Madam President. Dr. Patel, Matt, Stancy, Congress. When I first read this not too long ago, I was absolutely amazed. This is a very complicated thing. I am so happy about all the work that you put into this, the creativity that's involved with this, and we're going to have a workshop on this. So we need to take a deeper dive into this. I will express that I am happy about the choice about the legacy students, but I'm a little concerned about the potential that maybe they'd have to provide their own transportation. But again, we have to take a good, deeper dive into this. But this is absolutely marvelous, and we all know that, as Dr. Bilal had indicated, that we haven't had such a comprehensive redistricting throughout my entire career. When I read this, it just made it so much easier for me to kind of understand it. So my heartfelt thanks to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Silkworth. Ms. Frank?
Yes, thank you. So when we received this information in advance, I was trying to look at what the superintendent's recommendation would be, and I got, very intrigued, and I didn't want to reach out just yet because there were so many charts and graphs and squiggly lines that I wanted to make sure I understood the full presentation before sending my thanks, but I will now. So thank you very much for all of your hard work. I know a lot of folks from the Chesapeake cluster were very concerned, to Mrs. Schalheim's point. They've been trying for at least the 40 years that I've been alive to fix Mountain Road and haven't succeeded yet, so I highly, highly suspect that will continue in that particular vein. I do appreciate the references to what a dangerous road it is and why it was important not to send so many more cars down the corridor. I do appreciate that you looked at that. One sort of point that I wanted to make about CBMS, if we make an administrative workspace, we take it out of essentially circulation. It has an A side and a B side. Have we considered consolidating the one wing into the other?
Yeah, so Chesapeake Bay Middle School is a
Very
mirror
unique.
image of Magathie Severn. So it's essentially two middle schools in one. And that would open up additional space for, like Matt was talking about, administrative or storage. So we could look at that. But again, no definite plans have been established.
I guess what I'm saying is if you moved the 8th grade side into the other side, would you have an entire wing, or are you looking at like just a few areas to shave off? Like
We haven't
looked
dove
at
that
that
deep
Okay.
yet.
All right. Just I would definitely want to be kept updated on that. I think that's a great opportunity to reallocate space, and I'm just curious as to how you would do it. But other than that, I'm very impressed with this presentation, and I'm very, very appreciative on behalf of District 3.
Thank you. Ms. Ellis?
Thank you. Thank you for a great presentation. I do have a few questions. First one that jumped out at me when you mentioned the blueprint. Will the blueprint change the determination of capacity, since we'll need more space for teachers in order to meet the requirements? Has anyone thought that part through yet? And do we need action in the state legislature to address that?
So state rated capacity is pretty prescriptive as far as the formula that we use to calculate that, classrooms versus non-classrooms, and then based on the different levels, that would get adjusted. So depending on the programming that is in an individual school, that could adjust the SRC or state rated capacity based on what programs are put in there. Pre-K, for example, has a lower state rated capacity for a classroom versus a 1 through 5 classroom. So if you added pre-K to schools and you took away a regular classroom, it would essentially reduce the capacity. So
I
there's
get
different
that.
ways.
But the blueprint has essentially made more requirements of our space. And have there been adjustments as a result to the formula of state-rated capacity? And so should we be getting with our legislators about that?
Again, the state rated capacity only accounts for classrooms. So if you're using those for planning space, they wouldn't be counted as a classroom and your capacity would get reduced. I think the way it's already written allows for that adjustment.
Okay, okay, all right. So if we were to use one of our buildings for administrative, that would reduce the capacity. Okay, okay, that answers that, thank you. And then, so the scenarios, I assume included all anticipated development, right? Because there will be population adjustments. So that's been factored in, going how far into the future?
We looked at major developments. Not every single development was accounted for, but the major developments within that northern redistricting area were evaluated based on build out, and our target year was really 2031.
Okay. And then here's the biggie for me, and I expressed concerns about 2 phases, right? Because drawing a line between north and south, I think ties our hands a little bit in being fully comprehensive and fully balancing our facilities. So, so in order to be fully comprehensive and maximize the balancing of our school facilities, I imagine those schools or communities on the southern border of phase 1 could be impacted in phase 2. Correct? Is that correct?
Yes, that's a correct assumption to make.
Okay, and then I heard phase 2 was not in any way considered for phase 1. Is phase 2 gonna get that same treatment? Are we not gonna consider what's already happened in phase 1 as we try to meet the needs of the southern part of the county? In other words, someone on that southern border of phase 1, well, we just moved them, so maybe we shouldn't move them now. And I'm not advocating for moving families twice. I have concerns with the 2-phase process, but I am concerned that the southern part of the county gets the same level of consideration. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but there's one very difficult piece. You had to start somewhere. So it could have been the opposite, that we started with the group of schools in scenario 2, not taking into consideration what we've done in scenario 1, right? But ultimately, that means the same process applies, right? You're going to have to, because you're doing a second phase, there are boundary lines that have to be touched. I mean, there's no way that you're going to be able to avoid that. I don't want to have to move a family twice, but I've been adamant from the first day that you all brought it to my attention that families are going to have to be touched twice out of this. There's no way that you can get around it. So that statement is one that we cannot honor, even though we want to. I cannot honor that, because we know when we look at phase 2 and how the lines are drawn to balance the system, there's going to be some additional movement for certain families, and there's no way around that, Ms. Ellis.
So I get that. I just so people understand what I envision as a possible solution, but you might be too far down the road for this, was to take all the critical areas, the schools that are busting at the seams, and move them outwards, knowing that we're going to crowd some other schools for a couple of years, knowing that students are then going to move out who were not already moved, right? That would have avoided moving families twice. I just want to make sure that that the southern part of the county gets the same treatment as the northern part of the county.
I would just say, Ms. Ellis, you know, we would use board policy and regulation as our guiding document for phase 2, just like we did phase 1. And in phase 2, it does not, in the policy or reg, it does not mention don't touch families twice, right? So we would try to minimize it where we could, but we would, I think the board policy specifically outlines the metrics to use in determining boundaries, and we would stick to those metrics.
Okay, thank you. And finally, I just really want to encourage public participation. We're suddenly obviously there's been lots of input, and that's great, and that definitely informs a lot. I know it informed the superintendent's recommended plan here. But it is next month, late August, that any plans that will be brought forward for consideration have to be figured out by then. So it is now that if you have seen what the scenarios are and what's being recommended, if you have concerns, now's the time to voice them, because there needs to be time to tweak or develop any other scenarios before we finalize this, right?
And I would encourage folks after this meeting, later this afternoon, that website noted up on the screen right now will be active. The web tool in the same format or similar format to what we had prior will be available. We're going to be utilizing the map comment function. So at the bottom right of the screen, there'll be a little red or orangish color box that says comment. Click on that, click on the map, and you can provide us geolocated information on any of concerns that you have.
Can we get a communication out to families, sort of saying, okay, the recommendation has been made, it's sort of bullet point, here's where it is, and now's your opportunity if you have concerns to weigh in. I know it's hard to get people to engage in the summer, but like you said, Dr. Bedell, you can't say you didn't have input once the scenarios are taken to the public late August.
We are planning Bob Moser, Chief Communications Officer. We're planning a communication this afternoon and have plans to repeat that communication in the coming weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Corkadell.
No mercy.
Thank you guys very much. Very thorough, and exactly what I expected. As was reported earlier. I too had questions about the SRC, so it sounds like you've answered most of them. But I do have one other question. In situations where some of our schools provide unique services based on the community that they traditionally serve. So at Fort Meade, those schools that are seated at Fort Meade tend to provide wraparound services for some of those veteran families that do carry on from the middle school to the high school that are not easily replicated in other high schools. Number one, I presume that those were considerations in through it, but based on that, is there a plan to approach how we would ensure that those services that these students are benefiting from will still be able to be provided the same as if it was Meade High School providing them, because Meade High School is where DOD gives us those monies to do it for those school students, include MacArthur and all the others that are on the base, because of the community that they serve. Does that make sense, the question?
Yeah, no, I think it does. And Ms. Corkadell, I think from a process standpoint, we would, what's good about this timing is it is a potential decision from the board is in line with the time we're crafting the fiscal 25 budget, right? And so if we, as we start to get more granular with it and see that there are significant populations leaving that Fort Meade area to go to Old Mill West, we would certainly, either realign resources if possible, or if not, we would, more than likely put in a budget request to implement what we felt was necessary to support those transitioning students. And I think it's important to note, we have to look through not just for the military families, but all, we have potentially 6,500 students moving. Those transitions can be difficult, and we have to build systems and structures in place to ensure that those supports are in place for both the families themselves, but the schools receiving those students, right? And I think that will be part of our discussions into the fall as we make final decisions, and obviously in discussions with the fort as well, in that partnership to talk about, hey, we may be spreading out a few more students that were once concentrated at Meade High School. They may be now at Old Mill West or another high school, and what can we provide those students to ensure that transition is smooth and that those students remain successful.
Yeah, because, that is pretty sensitive. We're going to have to make sure we work through, because if a military family just moves here and now they're sitting at the middle school and 1 year later are not going to be matriculating with those relationships that they just had, those 3 to 5 years that they spend as residents of Anne Arundel County, I would hope we could find a way, and I'm sure we will. And likewise, too, I know that Central Elementary, for example, and Central Middle, because of their proximity to other related services for some of our students at Central Special, benefit from that campus collaboration. So I know when we get to, although when I look at a map, it looks pretty insulated in and of itself. When we get to that phase 2, I would expect, sounds like we would be doing similar. I would just ask that too often we think that we adequately communicate, and that repetition of communication, also not just the initial communication itself, because of our time of year and of when we are doing this. And I suspect that budgetary implications would be likewise approved. Do we have any preliminary indication that our funding sources are going to be supportive of that, given some of the conflicting priorities of budget? In other words, if we adopt something and some of those services we need to provide are not accommodated for in the budget, are we willing to make adjustments to the redistrict, or recommend, I guess in you guys' position, we recommend adjustments made accordingly, or?
I have not had any discussions with
Because the
county
budget won't
government yet.
pass till after we pass this. That's what I was
Correct.
asking.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think, again, support for transitioning students will be one of many priorities, and I think in the fiscal 25 budget.
Well, we don't have a crystal ball, but it's
Correct.
helpful to know
Yep.
that, just as for a matter of public, that, we know, we recognize this, and we'll do our best, and whatever I can do to support those efforts, by all means, I am available. Once again, thank you guys very much, and I look forward to listening to these others. Although it's not my personal district, over the years, I have had the opportunity to get to know a lot of our counties, communities, and know that although redistricting may be the second worst thing that a district can go through, that this will afford new opportunities in funding for our schools in the future, for renovations, as well as, do we need another school, which may not be as distant of a conversation as we think it may be now. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody have any need for additional questions or comments? I would just like to add my thanks. I know this is a huge amount of work. I know there's a huge team that stands behind you, and please convey our thanks. I think also, just to add to the recent questions, generally it's my understanding that one of the essential premises of the blueprint is that money follow the child. And so with regard, I would assume, to whatever may happen as we shift students around, should that significantly change the farms rate or whatever in a particular school, one aspect of Blueprint is that's different from transitioning, I understand, but that automatically means that those monies will then become available based on the students in the school. So that is good to know. All right, I think that concludes our questions for now. Obviously, there will be many more. Thank you all very, very much, and we will see you on the 26th.